So welcome again to the October 13th general meeting of the Whiteaker Community Council. We're really excited to have some folks here tonight talking about the work that they do here in our community in partnership with our community. We have Sheryl Balthrop, the Executive Director of the Eugene Mission. Welcome, Sheryl. Thanks once again for joining us this evening and talking about the exciting work that the mission's doing. Also joining us in a little bit is going to be Peter Keys, a board member of Better Housing Together. An organization that works in coalition with nonprofits and community-based organizations like ours to increase housing affordability, diversity, and supply. Last, we're going to have representatives from SURJ, the Eugene chapter of SURJ, which is showing up for racial justice, to discuss police policy reform. They're asking for the Whiteaker Community Council's endorsement of a letter advocating for reform that's been espoused by the ad hoc Committee on Police Policy that's worked with community-based organizations across Eugene, really emphasizing communities of color and communities that have been historically marginalized and disproportionately impacted by policing to be able to reform police policy. So really thrilled to be able to have the lineup tonight. And I wanted to say there's 4 different ways for you to voice your interest in participating in the conversation, because really this is about us. We work because y'all show up and tell us how we as an organization should better serve the neighborhood. So there's, like I said, 4 different ways that you can participate. The first is really easy. If you have your video screen on, all y'all need to do is just raise your hand. Delenia, thanks so much for giving that great example of how to toss your hand up. The second way is by raising your virtual hand. So that's what I'm doing right now. Delenia too. Thea, thanks so much. And what that does for me is it puts you on my screen at the front of the queue. And that's going to be really easy for me because I'm going to be the one facilitating the meeting, calling on people in our speaking order that I'll talk about in just a second. The third way that you can voice your interest in participating is by calling in. So if anyone's here on the telephone, or in the future, if you're calling into one of our meetings, all you need to do is say your name. Sheryl, I'm going to pick on you. So if you were calling in this evening, you would say your name, Sheryl, and that would be an indication to me that you'd like to be in the order to speak. And then the last way, and the way that's easiest for me, is that you can use the Zoom chat. And for those of you who are on your first Zoom meeting, there's different ways to access the Zoom chat function. If you press chat, if you're on your smartphone or you're on your computer, something should pop up. And then you can see in this hypothetical, let's say Thea wanted to contribute. She'd message in the group chat that she wants to be able to speak, and that I would let people know that Thea's in the queue, but Thea wasn't fast enough. Jen was faster to the draw, and I would let people know that the speaking order is Jen first and then Thea. And so those are the 4 different ways to participate: raising your hand, raising your virtual hand. If you're calling on a phone, just saying, hey, my name is X, and that's going to be a signal to me. And the last way is using the Zoom chat. So really excited to jump right in tonight. And we're going to start with public comment. So public comment, anyone from the community or anyone in the meeting can jump in and share. And this includes board members as well. We are a nonprofit organization that's elected by the neighborhood. And because of that, we serve on a board of directors that makes decisions based on consensus with respect to the organization. And anyone who comes to one meeting is eligible to run for our elections in April. And Angie, our board secretary, is going to be keeping track of who's coming to our meetings so that you're going to be eligible to vote in our elections in April. So please, if you're interested in running, feel free to send a private message our way, and we can share with you more information on how to participate. So if anyone has public comment, please raise your hand or shoot me something in the group chat. And Thea, I saw your hand up first, so please feel free to unmute yourself and be our first member for public comment. Thea?
So I have been working as the WCC's Parks and Safety Liaison. I talk with a lot of the city members, and I've been working really closely with Kelly McIver, who is the new public relations person for the city, and with the Railroad Police, Sean Bishop for Union Pacific, and with Chief Skinner to work on getting the Ninkasi wall cleaned up, because we've had quite a criminal element there. And yesterday, EPD went in and cleaned out that element, and they made 3 arrests. They had quite a bit of warrants. They found quite a bit of stolen stuff. For those of you who live on Polk Street or Grand or over around Clark, Hopefully we will see some relief, and also Sladden Park area. But Polk and Grant have been getting hit very, very hard, and we think it might be from that group. So there is some relief there. I did let the chief know today that some of that group just moved right next to the railroad crossing right on Van Buren. So he'll look into that. We are also starting to get some extra patrols in our neighborhood. I've let him know that a lot of the behavior is happening between 3 in the morning and 5 in the morning. We've had a lot of car break-ins, shed break-ins, thefts out of yards and on porches. So they will start working on that. Kelly MacGyver is working on getting some changes in parking in front of Red Apple. That's probably going to go to 2-hour parking like it is in front of Chaparral Yao right now, because the campers that were out there were harassing the customers as they were coming and going. Some of those people were able to move to the safe sleep site. So when they're moving some of these people, they are getting moved to the safe sleep site. The safe sleep site is not full on 3rd and Garfield. I had heard it was full, but it is not full. So they are still moving people there. And the chief says he's willing to come to any meeting we'd like him to come to. Okay. And I think that's about it. I know that Grays and Bruns have had some real rough times lately. Someone tried to light Bruns on fire, and Grays has had to repair their fence once a week because somebody comes along and cuts it. So I don't think there's any other updates other than, please, if there's some issues, report it, whether it's online or call it in. It's the only way they're going to know that things are happening. Are there any questions?
Got a question from Delinia, and then I think either Dan was very artistically scratching his nose, or he had a question as well. No, it's just artistic nose scratching. Delinia, go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you, Thea, for working with them and making a huge difference. Thank you. I know it's been a long haul.
It's been probably the most exhausting summer for the residents, housed and unhoused this year. So we just hope that some of these safe sleep sites getting up and going, and I'm looking forward to Sheryl. Thank you so much for being here to hear what you're doing and what we can do to help you as well. Okay.
We've got Margaret next in the queue. Margaret.
So just a couple things, just for general information, for those of you that do not know, Nelson has taken on Tiny Tavern. He is moving his food cart. He's going to have it open in the day, and then he's taking over the restaurant at night. So he's very excited about that. I went by to check on his stuff the other day. He has a hand sanitizer out there, and he came out and wanted to take me inside and give me a tour. And he's just waiting for all of his licensing and stuff to come through. So, you know, if you see him, give him a big high five. He is super excited. He said it's his time, which it is. He's been on the front page of the paper, been on the news. I mean, he's really making a great footprint, and I'm glad to see someone going in there that's actually active in the community. On that same note, so I have a friend that lives between Bari and Scobert Park there. And Thea, I want to say thank you. I know you had a whole lot to do with it. He has been having major problems. He has kids, lots of people. There's lots of activity out there at night. And that at this point is no more. He told me Margaret Manzano went over. I talked to her when we did the Whiteaker market, and she met him. He said she went over to his house. Thea has talked to him, and they've really went in there and cleaned a lot of that area up. And it's not, it was getting a little violent at times. So again, Thea, great job. Thank you very much. That's it.
Thanks, Margaret. Does anyone else want to speak? We've got a hand up from Thea, and I just wanted to let people know you certainly don't have to keep your video screen on during the meeting. You can still contribute. And for those of you who just joined, You can, there's 4 different ways you can voice your interest in participating. You can unmute and say your name. You can raise your hand virtually. You can raise your hand physically, or you can type in the Zoom chat that you'd like to contribute to the conversation. Thea, go right on ahead.
Also on the note of Scoburg Gardens, I'm working with Parks and Recreation so that when we get nice weather in the spring, to see if we can get the library bus to come and bring books to park for kids. And also Margaret's friend would like to start a chess club in the spring, so we can start getting some activation of positive things happening in Scoburg Gardens this spring. And there still is an interest of putting a community garden space in there. They're looking for more community garden space around Eugene. And so there was an ask on that. So those of you that live near there, if you're interested in that, let me know, send an email or something. But thank you very much, guys. And it's been a long summer.
Yep.
I'm gonna go to, and I am going to Black because I have to finish my dinner.
Totally, yeah, and we realize that it's dinner time for a lot of folks, so no need to keep your video on if you don't want to. And I for those of y'all who just joined, we are recording this meeting for folks who aren't able to be with us tonight. And Angie, the secretary of the WCC, is registering people's names so that thanks for waving, Angie, so that y'all are eligible to vote and run in our elections this coming April if you live, work, or own property in the Whiteaker. Angie, go right on ahead.
And I private messaged a couple of you that I need your last name and some other information.
Thanks so much, Angie. So I'm actually going to tap some folks to share tonight because y'all might be the best people to share. But if you don't want to share, then you can just pass it right back to me. Andrew, I see you're munching right now, so I won't tap on you for the Mupti thing. But Claire, I was wondering if you could share some of the exciting news about Nest and Better Eugene Springfield Transportation, but I'm happy to share the email too. But I thought you might be the best messenger to share this exciting news.
Yeah, definitely. And that's funny you mentioned that. I was actually just about to raise my virtual hand. Well, I see Margaret's hand up. Does that come first or no? Okay. So I guess I should start with the unfortunate, sad news that the Center for Appropriate Transport, after about 30 years, is officially disbanding as a nonprofit. As of November 1st of this year, they are no more as a nonprofit. And essentially, the next step for that space, which is not 100%, but it's looking to go in that direction, is for the building at 455 West First, previously housing CAT, to become the nexus for Eugene sustainable transportation. And that will be headed by the organization that I actually work for, Better Eugene Springfield Transportation, BEST. So it will be the BEST Nest. And as with any kind of thing of this nature, it could fall through for some reason tomorrow, but so I don't want to say 100% sure. But I will say 99% sure that the building will come to be given to Better Eugene Springfield Transportation. The anchor tenant we are looking to have in there is Cascadia Mobility, the new-ish operator of Peace Health Rides, those the blue bike share in town, for folks that are not familiar with that. And it's a really exciting thing, definitely bittersweet, definitely a sensitive situation. CAT has spent 30 years, in improving, creating, raising bicycle culture, sustainable transportation culture. Unfortunately, I haven't lived in Eugene so long to have seen some of the leaps and bounds that I've heard so much about CAT having, responsibility for in Jan Vandertine and everyone who worked and studied under Jan. And, it's going to be a transition for sure, but, I'm happy to say that we as in BEST has been working with Jan and with Leo and with CAT the entire process. And it's, hopefully we're going to be able to continue some of the programs that CAT had, going there. I can't really speak to what those will be or what the future will look like, but essentially the building owner wanted the building to continue to be used for sustainable transportation purposes, and that's exactly what Best intends to do. So, and I might have missed some points that were mentioned in the letter that was sent to Ian by Best, but Ian or Andrew sort of kind of have, you know, on the outskirts of the knowledge been involved, but yeah, Ian, if you want to take it away and maybe patch anything over that I missed.
I think you said it beautifully. The one thing that I would say is if you're interested in helping Best inform the plans for the building, please complete this survey. It's due by November the 1st. I just put the link in the Zoom chat, and we'll be sharing it after the meeting as well, so that folks who weren't able to attend tonight can help guide what they want to see in this space. Jan, from everything that I've heard too, Claire, was really a visionary in the way that he looked at appropriate technology, the rising dangers of greenhouse gases and their impact on our changing climate. And so, yeah, I'm thrilled at the prospect that the space could be kind of re-envisioned in a way which still advances the mission that the Center for Appropriate Transport had years and years ago. Apparently, Sheryl is sorry to learn about CAP, but learned bike maintenance there, and it made a great contribution in our community. So yeah, really thrilled by the prospect. And if folks have ideas about what they'd like to see, or what they don't want to see, or just put in words of support, please complete the survey by November 1st. Andrew, I wanted to go to you next, because I feel like you might have some words of wisdom to share either on the Best Nest or the multi-unit property tax exemption committee that's looking for neighborhood representatives in the next couple of weeks.
I don't have anything to add about the Best Nest, other than I'm really excited to see more bicycle stuff. You guys maybe don't know me well enough to know that I'm a total bike nerd. So I'm really excited just to see that being an active space again. And hopefully it turns out super cool and community oriented, particularly because I think our neighborhood would really benefit from that. But I can talk about, I don't know what email list I'm on, but I got an email from someone at the city about the MUFTI review panel. I guess there are 2 at-large neighborhood representatives. So if you're not familiar, MUFTI is the multi-unit property tax exemption. It's a tool that the city has at their disposal where they can choose to waive, I believe, up to 10 years of property taxes on a new development that goes in if they meet certain criteria. Not an expert on that. I know that it has been somewhat controversial because buildings like the 13th and Olive have received those, and that was primarily student housing, which maybe is not the spirit of the law. So anyway, that's all to say. I don't want to talk about it too negatively, because it is actually a really important tool that our city has to make development that we want to see happen, right? If it's used on the right type of developments. And that's where this MUFTI review panel comes in. That there are citizens who get to, I guess, advise city council on whether or not they should grant that property tax exemption to developments. And my understanding is that the neighborhood associations, I'm guessing it's the neighborhood leadership council, not totally sure, but the neighborhoods get to elect these 2 at-large members. And then, for instance, I believe that there are some members if it happens in your neighborhood. So if someone's proposing something in the Whiteaker, we would automatically get some seats at the table, but that citywide, other neighborhoods, there are some at-large positions. So if anyone has any interest in that, it'd be advising the city on whether or not to grant these tax exemptions. I think they meet a few times a year to review proposals. I'm happy to forward that information to you. Or if you want to nominate someone, I think you're allowed to nominate people as well.
Thanks so much, Andrew. And folks, if you want to apply for one of the 2 neighborhood representatives on the advisory board, I've just put the SurveyMonkey application in the Zoom chat. Welcome, Councilmember Syret. We're just in the public comment section of our meeting, and we're soon going to pivot and cede the virtual floor to Sheryl from the Eugene Mission. I've just got a couple of quick things to share with folks. The first of which is that we're talking about police policy reform tonight. I just wanted to invite folks to the Police Commission meeting tomorrow, where I'm going to be presenting a recommendation to the Police Commission for gender inclusive and gender diverse language in our police policy manual to reduce implicit bias. It's a lot more exciting than I'm making it sound, unfortunately. I don't think I'm the right person to do the sales pitch. I think SURJ is going to do a much better job tonight, but I can say that we all have bias, and implicit bias, unlike explicit bias, like, oh gosh, I really hate slippers, or broccoli is not my favorite vegetable, right? Those are explicit biases, but implicit biases are the more unconscious ones. And some of our implicit biases really impact our ability to make decisions, but these can really have negative impacts for police officers individually, but also police departments collectively. And some great science has come out to show that while implicit bias training doesn't really have that much of an effective impact, changes to police policy can have a tremendous impact in the way that police officers interact with the public and increase their capacity to make critical decisions, especially if they're really quick ones. And with persons who are gender non-binary and transgender disproportionately being the victims of violent crimes, as well as crimes by police officers, I think it's really important that we have gender diverse and gender inclusive language in police policy to make sure that our police officers have reductions to their implicit biases as much as possible. So feel free to join tomorrow. It's from 5:30 to 8 p.m. and the gender inclusive and diverse language part of it is towards the end of the meeting, but you can see more in the link that I just sent. I also wanted to say that the WCC is going to be moving our highly successful wellness clinics out of Illuvium and into a new location beginning October 29th for our clinic on Friday at the end of the month, as well as future clinics. And a variety of factors have contributed to the way that we've needed to find a new home for our wellness clinics. And we're going to continue to strive to provide a clean, accessible, and neighborhood-based wellness clinic where all the community can feel safe and comfortable. And since March of this year, we've been really blessed to partner with amazing organizations and vaccinated more than 750 of our neighbors with free COVID vaccines. And we've provided free COVID testing, STI testing from HIV Alliance, groceries from our partners at Burrito Brigade, menstrual supplies for people with periods from Eugene Bleeds, which is a new mutual aid organization here in the Whiteaker, haircuts, and a lot more. So more information on the new wellness clinic location is going to be provided soon. And the board tonight is going to vote on a potential partner, the Hybrid Lounge, which is right down the street from our previous location. Last thing that I wanted to talk about before we move on to Sheryl Balthrop to give an update on the Eugene Mission's programs is that we're looking for artists. Part of our work to prevent the spread of COVID in our community involves increasing vaccine confidence. And one of the ways that we're doing that is by providing opportunities for artists in our community to get paid and to be able to share their art with the community. So right now I'm putting a call for artists. It's a JPEG in the Zoom chat, and we've had some tremendous submissions so far. People who have created what is eventually going to be yard signs that we pass out as vaccine incentives if people are getting their vaccine or for who have already gotten a vaccine and can prove that to us with a vaccine card, yard signs for our community so we can showcase vaccine confidence in our community, but also we can pay artists through the process. And this is funded through a grant that we're receiving through Lane County Public Health. Also at the same time, we're asking artists to be able to submit to us any potential designs they have for signs that slow down traffic. So one of the things that we want to be able to do with public health is have really creative ways that feel, super Whitaker-y, so that cars that are driving through our neighborhood slow down. So that's another way that we're going to be able to provide artists that are here in the WIP with funding to create unique ways to make sure that cars stay 20 miles per hour or less when they're driving through the neighborhood. And remember, folks, you can always bike or walk through, but we're offering up to $500 per artist and up to 3 artists for the vaccine confidence yard signs, and then up to $750 for the designs for the 20 is plenty, 20 es suficiente signs to slow down traffic. So if you could please download the JPEG that's in the Zoom chat, share that with artists in your community. Jane's already got her hand up. I hope she's going to submit. So Jane, feel free to go right on ahead.
No, I'm wondering if we can also add to those fabulous signs something about every intersection is a crosswalk. And especially the crosswalks, we really mean it about the crosswalks on 5th.
Yeah, that's great. And I would say too that we're working with the city actively to see if we can create murals both on intersections and on crosswalks because there's some research that shows that's one way to effectively slow folks down. Margaret, I see your hand up and you might be the final word before we pass it on to Sheryl from the Eugene Mission. Margaret?
So just really quick. So the gal from the hybrid, actually, I spoke to her and she talked a little bit about what you're doing with the signs and all of that, and had said that maybe some artists do not have a computer or do not have a way to get the, what they make to you. And she said that they're more than welcome to go and see her. She'll scan it, file it, make sure it gets emailed, and that they will all get credit for what they do. And she wants to be involved in that.
That's
so
fantastic.
Just to put that out there.
Cool.
Millennia has her information, I think.
Perfect. Yep. That sounds fantastic. And I'll make sure that we pass that on to our program coordinator, Doriandra. Hi, Doriandra. So that we can make sure that we have that line of communication established. And for folks who've never met the Whiteaker Community Council's program coordinator, I'd love to introduce you to Doriandra Smith. Doriandra Smith is our program coordinator and has been brought on with grant funding and is the manager of our wellness clinics, as well as our push to use art to increase vaccine confidence in our community. So everyone, big thanks and hello to Doriandra. She's doing a fantastic job keeping us safe and making sure that we can use this funding to bring it back to the Whiteaker so we can spend every dollar here and make sure that folks who are entrepreneurs have just as much of an opportunity to benefit from these funds as community members who have increased access to the vaccine and COVID testing. So with that, I wanted to pass it on to Sheryl from the Eugene Mission. Sheryl, I just wanted to say, going onto the Eugene Mission's website and looking at y'all's extensive history, I can say that, it's definitely a feature, not a bug, to have the Eugene Mission here. And it's a tremendous set of programs that y'all have offered unhoused members in our community for a number of years. Really excited for you to join us tonight and to talk about some of the successes and programs that y'all have offered, and maybe even some potential for additional partnership, how we can support you now and in the future. So again, don't want to take up time away from you. I'll switch the sharing of the screen so you'll be able to share any images or a PowerPoint if you have it. And just wanted to say once again, thanks so much for joining us tonight, and really excited to hear more about what y'all at the Mission are doing for our community. Sheryl?
Great. Well, thank you, Ian. And thank you for what you're doing, Thea. Thank you. Councilor Surratt, really appreciate your service. I am so grateful to this group. I mean, I think about these amazing things you've been doing and caring for our community, the vaccine work, the hygiene stations. I can tell you, you are making a huge impact on our community's most vulnerable individuals. And it is an honor each time we have an opportunity to partner, to interface, to even have these opportunities to have conversations, because far too often in our community, we just don't have discussions. We have perceptions that sometimes just get held for years and years. And I have been so grateful to have the opportunity to just talk. And so I want to use this time primarily to be a resource for you all. I could have, you all know I come from a legal background, so I could bore you all to tears for hours, but I prefer to have this as a discussion. But I thought maybe just very, very quickly, I bring you up to speed on what has happened at the Eugene Mission since COVID, because many people don't realize just the dramatic impact that COVID, the changes, the impacts on a congregate dense structure that COVID has had. I can tell you it broke my heart to have to look at how we could safely house folks. As you all know or may know, we use bunk beds. we use large dormitories. So when the health impacts of COVID started to occur, we needed to, first of all, get rid of all the bunk beds, only have people at one level. We needed to de-densify and spread people out. And that dramatically reduced the number. Even when we turned over, most of us turned over our offices, we spread people out and turned every closet that would be a livable space into a space for guests. We had to reduce the number of guests because not only was it a living space issue, it was also where will people gather to eat? Where will people gather to spend their day hours? And so we went in very rough rounded numbers. We went from 400 a night to roughly 200 a night. And that just as I see the number of suffering people on the streets, it's really hard for me to think about, those extra 200 folks that aren't being served. I guess if there were a silver lining to all of this, as we've gone through this, we've really seen how we can make the greatest impact on helping folks rejoin healthy community. And we have really poured ourselves into relational work with our guests, where we're not just transactionally saying, hey, what do you need? Here you go, but rather starting to really pour into building trust, trying to get at some of the underlying traumas and challenges that our guests have, that it's not just a matter of getting clothes or getting food. While those things are needed, so often our guests are brutally lonely, brutally betrayed. And we are really finding that many of these soft needs need to be addressed before you can ever start looking at why is there an addiction issue? Why is there an inability to connect with services? So we have been spending that time, and the results have been spectacular. And thrilled to see that even in the past year, the extraordinary growth of our guests. Some of the details on how folks now enter and move through the mission. We have a low barrier entrance shelter at this point. We used to require folks to be sober to enter. Now folks can come as they are, but there does need to be a cessation of use upon entry into the mission. Folks enter our rescue shelter and can be there for up to 14 days. During that time, we're encouraging them to continue on at the mission. But to continue on at the mission, the guest needs to commit to look at some of the areas of barriers or impoverishment or challenge in their lives. It cannot be just simply a transactional situation where there's a receipt of something without any engagement. And I'm pleased to say that most of our guests do continue on and commit and either go into our R-Cubed program, which has a robust curriculum and life skills and vocational training and providing a lot of the things that we often think of with the wraparound services, or our addiction recovery program. And while there is not a cap on the length of the time they can participate, it is reviewed every 6 months to determine if there is ongoing progress on basically their plan. And those are developed by the individual. So that's a little bit of what it looks like now. Our goal is, I'm sure as everyone's is as COVID situations improve, I don't know when that will be, 2022, et cetera, we are hoping to return to our numbers, but only if that's safe for the health of our guests. We have so many individuals with very compromised health, respiratory issues, elderly guests who have really had some major health issues that we are very protective of them. So we need to be, if it were a nursing home standard, I'm sure we meet those for just the vulnerability of the health of our guests. So we continue to observe all of those protocols. How do guests come to us that are in an immediate crisis, that like persons with children, etc.? We will, the normal approach is to come at 9 o'clock each morning into our rescue center. I can tell you that just about every day we have availability, which is often not known in this community. We rarely have to ask anyone to come back the next day. If it is an emergency situation like domestic abuse or something of that nature, we will do anything to get them in, or inclement weather. We will make a spot there. But for the most part, I can tell you, we have had room for folks. And again, that's something that I find very concerning with all of the folks that we see under Washington Jefferson. We have outreach going. We are finding that folks are not taking advantage of that. We can speculate, is it because of our structure? Is it because of concerns of COVID? I mean, I'd love to talk to you all about that, but I can tell you there are resources available that are going unused, and that grieves me. So I could go on and on. We are seeing great success. We're looking forward to the future. We'd like to serve more. I would love to expand our programs. Occupy Medical is currently on site. I would love to see dental programs. I would love to see mental health. I would love to see other community partners come on site, and I will continue to seek those bridges. So with that, I'd like to make myself available to questions.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Really appreciate you sharing. And we've already got some hands jumping up. And folks, don't be shy. If you'd like to participate, Delinea is the first in the speaking queue. But feel free to let me know if you're interested in speaking. Margaret's fast on the draw. So we're going to go to Delinea first, and then Margaret, you're on deck. Delinea?
Thank you for what you're doing. Have you guys thought about also maybe adding to that list the mobile resource center? Because a lot of people, they can't drop what they need to, like they don't want to leave their tents because to go get services or anything like that, because it takes too long. Is that something that you guys be willing to look at?
Well, I think it would depend on, we're always looking at different types of approaches. What we would like, though, is folks to become engaged in, is it a life skill? Is it, each person is going to be different as to what they need. We have tried the day service approach, where we're simply making food and clothing, et cetera, available. And I've had these discussions with individuals. I think we were adding to some of the barriers and the disincentivizing of growth. And we have decided that without a commitment to forward movement, that we do not want to resource chronic homelessness. Absolutely when it's an emergency, but when it's a chronic situation, we would like to see folks being in a place that they are at least willing to explore some of the areas of impoverishment or barriers in their lives. So to your point, if it were simply to do a mobile outreach where items are dropped off, I think if anything, we're just continuing to hyper-resource and
Oh, no,
trap people in that.
that's not what I meant.
Oh.
I meant mobile resource center where they go out and find them and help them get the services they need. Not, like making that more mobile, especially nowadays, not food and water and stuff like that, but more getting them signed up for, to get their driver's license, to get their social security if they lost it, stuff like that.
Oh, we would be completely on board with that. I know the city and county are working on that with respect to the TAC initiatives. I would be happy to be looking at partnerships along those lines.
Thanks, Delinea. Margaret, we've got you up next in the queue, and then Claire, you're on deck. Margaret?
I just wanted to say, wow, I think what you have done and how you have restructured your program just sounds like a fantastic thing. And from what I hear is basically what you're doing is you are taking people in and helping them how to teach themselves to be accountable and to move their life forward, even if they come in and they're drunk or they're high or whatever the case may be. And you said they build their own plan basically under what you're doing?
Yes, it's modeled after the educational model of an individual action plan. So we're asking folks to tell us what areas have been a barrier in their lives. Is it social? Is it vocational? Many times people think, hey, I mean, this is a growth, not with this group, but we'll hear things like, why don't they get a job? We have folks that are older. We have folks that are not going to be returning to the workforce, and their barriers may be they need mental health support. They need to be working on seeing if they can be reunited with healthy family members, because their disconnection from community has been long-term, long-standing isolation and grief.
So you're taking what was once a revolving door and turning it into something where someone can actually grow and then move on in their life from that situation, which bravo, that is a great plan. Thank you very much for what you're doing.
Thank you. You know, one of the things we always have to look at ourselves and try to determine in what ways are we making it harder for folks to make progress. And we saw that with our guests, they would be struggling where they would come to us at the end of the month and then move out at the beginning of the month. And it's so crucial that we have the curriculum, that we have the relationships so that folks will stay working on things and not move out and lose that forward momentum. We wanted to get off that terrible treadmill.
Thank you so much, Margaret, and thank you so much, Cheryl. Claire, you're next in the queue, and then if anyone else wants to jump into the speaking order, excuse me, please feel free to raise your hand or jump in the Zoom chat. Claire, and then Jen, I see your hand up as well.
Yeah, hi Cheryl, thank you so much for being here. I was wondering if there are any specifics you could point to. Sorry for the gremlin sounds in the background, my two cats are fighting. If there's any specifics you've heard that are standout barriers for why people are not coming to the mission. You know, as you mentioned, there's openings, and that's what I've heard, is that it's closed all the time or it's full all the time. So there's obviously some kind of misconceptions floating around, and also, you know, if you are not able to identify the barriers, or like don't really have sort of like a vehicle to identify them, if there are any future plans for some kind of pointed outreach, you know, going out there and you know, forming these relationships with people who are unhoused and finding out why they are not coming to the mission.
Those are wonderful questions. Thank you. So we believe that it's been very confusing for some of our guests who are challenged at this time to, you know, either lower functioning or just where they are from a mental health perspective, et cetera, that when they see some of the hyper-resourced sites that do not have the very undesirable bedtimes and get-up times and expectations of participation in life skills, et cetera, that it's a hard sell to come to the mission. I mean, there are expectations that there will be a daily schedule and daily engagement, and that is something that some folks are not ready for. They have to believe that the people here care about them and are there for them, and that it's not just some sort of, you know, horrible location. Many of our staff have long-term good relationships with many of the folks out there suffering on the streets. And it's very hard on my staff when they're making progress with the guest, and then the guest, and this has happened, has received a stimulus amount or has heard about, hey, these great things are happening out at this location, and the guest goes away, and then we go out with our mobile team and are able to convince the guests to come back, but we get them back in much worse condition. And that is tough. We're trying to, we have good relationships with community partners. What we're trying to do is to let people know this is what we're doing with our programs. We're very much focusing on the long-term relational work that's really not compensated by government programs. If you have someone that wants to do that long-term work, get them to us, because we're here for them. And we don't have that many spots, but get as many of those folks to us so that we can make that investment. And that's how this group can help too, is that if you hear of folks that fit into that, that's where we can really leverage the work that the mission is doing. Unfortunately, what is happening, and I'm just going to be very frank, is that there are great needs in this community for things like medical respite, supported mental health facilities, secure facilities that so far exceed our ability to care for folks. We will have folks brought to us that we have no ability to provide for safely. And this community needs to provide places for them, because the mission just really does not have the staffing, the resources, or the expertise to help in those areas. So I think we need to see where the mission fits on that continuum of service and really focus on getting the folks to into that relational model where we can help.
Thank you.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. We've got two more folks, and then we're going to pass it on to Peter Keys from Better Housing Together, who's just joined us. Welcome, Peter. And Jen, I will pass it on to you next, and then Thea, you're on deck. Jen?
Yes, Cheryl, this is the first time that I have actually heard you, and that I felt a sense of connection and communication since when you first came to the WCC to participate and talk with us. So something's going on, and whatever it is, it's really good. I think, I don't know what to say other than thank you. I don't know what we can do offhand. I'm taking this in. It's just different the way you delivered this evening. And if there's anything we can do, please let us know, maybe specifically.
Thank you so much. I just have to say, I don't say this to, last year, I lived here at the mission for over 250 days, and it was humbling, and I learned so much. And I am absolutely committed to helping and caring for people at a deeper level. And this is hard work to help people heal. And we have to say some no's, but there's some really big yeses that we can say to people if we make some wise decisions. And I really could help, this group could help by helping us get that message out, that any entity cannot be a one size fits all for every group and individual out there in the unhoused community. We need to have folks that need mental health get into mental care facilities, folks that need foster care to foster care, folks that need medical support. Again, the way we have it is just not working. And as I'm sorry, I can't remember who mentioned this, but the safe sleeps are opportunities, but they're not filling, and they may not be able to address some of these deeper needs that we believe we can serve, and we are committed to serve. So please help us get the word out there. We deeply care and want to make a difference.
Thanks so much for that question, Jen, and really appreciate that answer, Cheryl. So we're going close out with our final word from Thea. And I think Thea has 2 questions for you. Thea?
So Cheryl, thank you again for all the work and for coming here. I'm sure you saw the Chamber of Commerce's report. And there were a lot of things in there. I'm still processing everything in there because it isn't, we can't have a one-size-fits-all program. It needs a special ed program. Because of COVID, how can we help via our own spaces? Like, I would love to come help teach reading or do reading circles or something with people from the mission, but I can't come into the mission. And I have other things I could offer. So how are ways we could help from home besides getting the word out? Because we definitely need to get the word out.
Well, I think like supporting the smaller community wraparound options is a wonderful thing that you do. That is so important. Getting the word out, helping us as advocates to speak into how critical it is that not all of our chits be put into the housing first model. This is not a popular thing that I'm saying, but this is a community has robust and wonderful approaches to mental health, to supporting our unhoused adolescents, and to creative housing options. And we are abandoning so many of them. We are hollowing out so many services in order to fit into the housing first model. And we are going to emerge on the other side of this and having lost a lot of these great services. So please consider that when you're out there advocating.
Thank you so much again, Cheryl. It's, yeah, when you said you lived at the mission for 250 days, yeah, I was just completely floored. I joined members of the Whiteaker Community Council in opening a cooling center this summer, and it's really humbling to be of service, even for just a couple of hours. So I can't imagine what it was like for the bulk of your year during as stressful a time as COVID was. And just thank you so much for your service, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. We have one kind of quick question from one of our board members, Margaret, about approximately how many beds do you have empty per evening? Because I think, to Thea's point, one of the things that we can do is be really good messengers and kind of deconstruct some of the misinformation that might be out there regarding capacity that the Eugene Mission has to support our community through your programs.
Okay, I have to answer it in 2 parts. So people enter through rescue, and we only have 15 beds in our rescue, which generally we have, I don't know, 5 or 6 beds each night, but I can accelerate people's movement through. We could probably take on easily another 40 into our R-cubed program, and probably another 7 or 8 into our addiction recovery program. And honestly, if we reach those amounts, I'd be looking at trying to find additional staffing and additional space on campus. But we have not reached those amounts. We don't see people returning yet. Maybe that'll change with the weather. But we really do need to get folks in, as many that we can. So I so appreciate this, everyone. And please do forgive me. I have about 15 missions coming to our mission tomorrow morning at 6:30, and I am not ready. So I have a bit of preparation to do tonight. So if you'll forgive me, I do need to sign off after my presentation.
Well, yeah, no harm, no foul. Thanks so much for joining us. And yeah, we really appreciate the role that you play in our community, in our neighborhood. Thanks so much, Cheryl. Hope you have a great evening.
Thank you so much.
And with that, we're gonna pass it on to Peter Keys. Peter Keys is a board member for Better Housing Together, and he's a associate professor emeritus of the School of Architecture and Environment at the University of Oregon. Peter, mispronouncing people's names and misconstruing their pedigree is a hobby of mine. So feel free to please slap me on the virtual wrist if I have got anything askew. Really excited for your comments tonight. and would love to learn more about Better Housing Together, as well as some of the work that you do collaboratively in community to increase affordability, diversity, and supply, what that might look like in the Whiteaker, and then how could we work together. If you do have any images or a presentation, I can just click and let you share with the group.
Yes, please let me share. I've got a little quick slideshow and such with a lot of information and statistics and proposals and such, I think would be interesting. So first, thanks for inviting me here tonight. Or you invited Karin, but Karin is incredibly busy, and so she sent me as I think as a poor substitute. And listening to this end of this conversation, I wish I'd come earlier, right? Because I forget, this is not what normal neighborhood committee meetings are like in Eugene, right? We're used to dealing with a lot of neighborhoods where there's just, I don't know, you know what they're like. It's the NIMBY capital of the planet. Or as I tell my former students now that I've retired, we used to say that there's NIMBYs, but Eugene has bananas. Do you know what bananas are? Banana stands for build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone, okay? And Eugene is full of people like that. And so Karin started Better Housing Together about 5 years ago, and Karin was one of our students about 10, 12 years ago, an amazing student, and has been doing amazing work. And what she realized, the brilliant thing about Eugene is you can come up with the best proposal in the world in Eugene, and 3 cranky people can shoot it down, right? All it takes is 3 cranky people getting to one city councilor and going, I don't know, and nothing ever happens. I've been in Eugene for 31 years, although I got 2 years off for good behavior. And I was one of the leaders in shooting down the Ferry Street Bridge proposal in the 90s, which then led to Fair Housing Together, to Friends of Eugene being formed and such. Anyway, so I'm very aware of the political processes, and Karin's brilliant insight was, we've got to get the political ducks in a row before we start making any policy proposals. So Better Housing Together spent 2 years just lining up political support, lining up individuals and groups, so that when the 3 cranky people show up at city council, we can say, there's 3 cranky people over there, there's 50 civic organizations over here. Who are you going to listen to? And so that has been what we spent years doing. And Karin has been an amazing leader in that. And I just, this is what you want as a teacher. You want your students to go out and be much more effective than you have ever been. So we're now moving into with House Bill 2001, we'll talk about in a bit, has sort of changed the game plan for what we were hoping to do in Eugene. So as Ian said, the 3 things that we try to focus on in Eugene is housing supply. We're just not building enough housing. We'll talk about that. We can talk about that a little bit more. 2 is diversity of household types, of the kinds of people whose needs are being served, but also housing types. We just keep building overwhelmingly big single-family detached houses, which is not what we need. And 3rd is affordability. I've been working in housing affordability for 40-something years, back in New York and then in Eugene. And for those of you who are associated with NEDCO, I designed the Field of Dreams project out off Roosevelt Boulevard about 25 years ago. So I was involved with NEDCO back in the olden days doing those projects. So why don't I, if I can do a screen share here, why don't I just do, let me see if I can get, I'm trying to remember, I haven't taught a lecture course in weeks. And let me start that. If I start the play, no, I can't start the play. You're probably not seeing that. Let me try sharing first. I've forgotten my protocol here. Share screen, and I will share the let me share. Why is it not 2? Let me share 2. That's not showing up there. They changed Zoom on me over the summer. What's going on here? Let me just go with that. Let me try that. And hopefully I then can jump into that. And I have this all.
If you press play at the very top,
yes,
to the left of table,
yes, I think but where's the play gone on my screen? The play has just here it is. Play slideshow. Hopefully this did that work?
Yep, it works.
Excellent. Okay, great. Thanks. So Better Housing Together is, really about trying to deal with the large range of issues we're dealing with in housing. So this is a diagram. These are all the partners in Better Housing Together. And you can see it's a pretty broad range of people. The University of Oregon, the Chamber of Commerce, Bring, Habitat for Humanity, 350 Eugene, Cornerstone Housing. So we've got and the amazing thing is we've got the sort of for-profit home builders on board, as well as the nonprofit, affordable housing providers. It's a really, really broad, then NAACP we've been working with. It's an incredibly broad base thing of people saying, we have a housing crisis here, we have to do something about it. And so one of the questions is, what does it take to join? Well, all you have to do is commit to working collaboratively. And that's been one of the really great things in the past few years, where we've actually, the whole deal on the construction excise tax to support housing as such was something that Better Housing Together really kind of brokered by getting the home builders on board to actually support a housing construction tax that would support other housing efforts. That was just mind-boggling that they would do that, but they really sort of understand, bettering the whole community. So it's been a real pleasure working and getting some things moving forward. Also, the recent ADU revisions that happened, Better Housing Together was really working on the ground to try to make sure those did not get too derailed. I'm sure you know this, but we find in many places in Eugene, people don't know this. We have a serious housing crisis, right? More than 40% of the households in Lane County are cost burdened, means they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing. And when you compare it to income, I remember at one point, whoever calculates what used to be called the affordability index made it, instead of being the 150 biggest cities in the country, they went to the 250 biggest. So Eugene entered the list and entered as being the least affordable housing market in the country. It's not that housing is actually in absolute terms that expensive here, but relative to what people make, it's really expensive. It's actually more expensive relatively than living in the Portland area or in the Seattle area, where salaries are much higher. And so this is just a thing about what it takes to be able to afford. You'd have to make $23 an hour living in Oregon and be able to afford sort of the median priced housing at this point. That's the affordability side. There's the supply side. This is just a chart of how much housing has been built in Oregon since 1990. And you can see that, if the flat line is, we'd have to build 44 housing permits per year in order to keep up the population growth. And we just haven't. And it's been dropping precipitously in recent years. So it is absolutely a supply issue. The thing that comes along that I want to talk about a bit, middle housing, the House Bill 2001 passed 2 years ago with a support from a lot of progressive organizations around the state. And it basically says, you can build missing middle housing. You can put up to 4 in a city of Eugene size. You can put up to 4 units on any residential lot. And the brilliant thing that would happen in House Bill 2001 was they knew that Eugene would drag its feet and file lawsuits and take it to LUBA and do all of that. So there's what's informally called the Eugene provision, which is you have until July of 2022 to come up with your own design guidelines and zoning revisions on how to implement this. And if you don't do that, we will hand you the code you have to follow. And so just a sort of it's the sword, it's the stick hanging over Eugene's head. And Karin and I and some other local people in Eugene and from Springfield were on a technical advisory committee working with DLCD all throughout 2020. And we wrote basically the minimum compliance code. And we wrote also the sort of the default code. If Eugene doesn't get its act together, this is the code we'll have to be using. So this will happen next summer, whether the NIMBYs or whoever, how much they want to drag their feet, this will actually happen. So missing middle housing just points out that, what we build, and certainly this is a famous diagram that Daniel Perolic down in Berkeley did, that we build single family detached houses, and then we build mid-rise apartment buildings. And we used to build this whole range of housing in between, from duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, bungalow courts, courtyard projects, all these things, and we stopped doing them. Why? Because zoning made it illegal fundamentally. This is not a new concept. So when I used to run our Portland program back in the late 90s, and I was actually, before anyone thought of calling this missing middle housing, I wish I'd thought of that and copyrighted the term. I'd be famous at this point. I was calling them streetcar housing. And I would just track down all the older small scale multifamily housing projects that were built along the old streetcar lines in Portland. And this is the kind of thing that was built. Extraordinarily useful, really densifies neighborhoods, provides a really wide range of housing types to different sized and types of households and different income levels, and something that zoning has fundamentally disallowed. for the past 60 or 70 years in most places. So House Bill 2001 has basically said, I won't go into the details, but it said you can put up to 4 units on any residential lot, and that will go into effect next July. So how can the missing middle housing options help, right? So here you just see, it's, again, we're always having these arguments with the NIMBYs about what a neighborhood's going to look like. Is this going to destroy our character? Well, these are duplexes, right? It looks like a house. It's the same scale as a house, but instead of being one, moderately sized house, it happens to be 2 smaller apartments. And this is the basic premise that we were looking at. So when you look at the sort of similar massing or volumes of these houses along the street, you don't really know. I mean, when I went back to Portland, I would go up to these buildings, and the only way you could tell, like say on the bottom left, is a building in Irvington, and the only way you can tell how many units it was is to go up and count the doorbells on the building. You'd think it was a big house, and then you step back and you say, oh no, there's 6 apartments in that building. So that's a really useful strategy. And so a lot of the guidelines that we wrote for DLCD have to do with how to implement this and how to sort of think about the buildings physically can fit into the neighborhoods. You can see that, this just hasn't changed, that basically 3/4 of the housing that's built in Oregon for the past 30 years is single family detached housing. Eugene, I did some research. Eugene has 15,000 households that are single person households. We have under 3,000 studio apartments, okay? The city is full of single people living in 3-bedroom houses because there are no other options about where to live. So there's a mismatch between what households need and the kind of housing that's actually provided. I moved here as a single person from the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and I bought a house. It was like, that was crazy. Either I'm going to live in a student apartment building or I'm going to buy a house. And I bought a house, and I was like, this is nuts, right? And so what's really interesting, this is a sort of a diagram, infographic we produced on and when we switch to talking about affordability, what are the affordability levels we need to think about? So, what do people make at different levels of income? How much can they afford for housing each month? And what does that say about what kind of housing is available? And obviously, as you all know from experience or from the people there's just so many people who can't afford the housing type that they need, the size they need for their household size. And we should, we talk about, being at median income. And if you're talking about 100% of, area median income, 75% of the occupations that people have are below 100 AMI. So there are people like office workers and EMTs and minimum wage workers or preschool teachers. How do these people find housing? So that's, obviously, there's ways to make housing cheaper. There's very limited number. I'm an architect, and people always ask us, how do we make it cheaper? Well, a 2x4 costs what a 2x4 costs. There's no way around that. You can make it cheaper by making it smaller, and you can make it cheaper by making it denser. And so these are strategies that missing middle sort of gets at both of those. And then we've talked about other issues we care about: sustainability, resilience, all of those. Smaller houses are incredibly more sustainable than big houses. This is just looking at energy use over its lifetime and resources going into building those houses. So when you look at a typical block, you can develop it with 2 houses, or you can take that same amount of infrastructure and you can sort of spread it over a much larger number of houses and obviously amortize those costs and be much more efficient in your use of that. So one question we're often asked, will this solve everything? I find in Eugene, one of the clear principles is that the perfect is the enemy of the good. So when we propose things like this, we have people jumping up and screaming, well, how will this solve the homeless problem? And we say, well, it won't solve the homeless problem by itself, but you weren't really that interested in solving the homeless problem anyway, were you? Right? You're just looking at some way of shooting this down. So no, more work is needed. And there are really other things we need to think about in addition. So what we're interested in Better Housing Together is a wide range of housing solutions. We have a number of, nonprofit affordable housing providers and such on our board from Cornerstone. Darcy is from Cornerstone. And so we recognize that we're not going to solve our housing problems with one silver bullet. There's probably about 10 different components to solving the housing problems we want, but we think that missing middle will start to solve a lot of it. This is a project you might have seen, the co-op housing in Springfield. This was done by Dylan Lamar, who was, I'm proud to say, was another one of my students about 10, 12 years ago. And he just built a 6-unit co-op project, community land trust on the land, and 6 small units that, and this was before House Bill 2001. He figured out how to beat the code and such to get those 6 units onto that site. And you can see how it just fits into the neighborhood, right? A lot of the objections we get are, what is this is going to destroy the character of our neighborhoods? Well, we can have great housing that really meets our needs and fits in. The other thing about it is when we're talking about smaller units, they require much less subsidy per unit than larger units obviously are going to. And we like this idea of it being a decentralized thing, small scale projects. That's not like urban renewal. It's not like grandiose social engineering schemes to solve this. They're really projects that can start to fit into the neighborhood character. This is something we talk a bit about getting into home ownership issues. And home ownership has traditionally been the way that working class and middle class people build wealth in this country. And we've focused on obviously a lot of people pointed out in recent years the difference between if minorities' income levels have been going up, but their wealth accumulation levels have not been going up at all. And this is the way that people sort of get into the middle class and build some wealth, is often through home ownership. When I worked on the Field of Dreams project 25 years ago, Nedco had this unbelievable lease to own system set up so that people could move in and rent and then assume ownership of the building over time, which all of them did within 5 years. It was quite remarkable. And so we think about this is one of the things that missing middle can lead to. I just want to show you some I've been teaching housing studios dealing with these issues, specifically in Eugene and Springfield, for about 5 years. I had a great student, Holly, who's now stayed in Eugene, is still here to keep working on this. And this is from her thesis project last year. She said, this is a typical block, sort of around Hilliard, sort of east of Amazon Park and such. And it's got 18 houses on it right now on these big lots. And she just went through scenarios of, well, then you start building more things in the backyards and doing these ADUs and doing missing middle stuff. And you've added 21 units. And then you sort of get to the next phase, and she ran all the numbers, the economic analysis on this. You get to 48 units, you get to 64 new units, you get to 89 new units, and 14 of the original houses are still there. So this is a way that is, and she just did these beautiful studies that showed that this doesn't fundamentally change what these neighborhoods are like. It really tries to work with the character of what these neighborhoods, but try to make more smaller units that'll meet a wider range of needs. I also taught a studio a number of years ago, about 3 years ago, where we looked at different sizes of sites, from single lot sites, aggregated sites, and then commercial sites, and then the different kinds of neighborhoods that Eugene has, and we tried to design housing that worked for all of those conditions. So we're really looking at how do we take these general principles and adapt them to fit into these different neighborhood types in Eugene. So the main thing is that we need more housing options, right? And so we did a survey last year, and we found that there's overwhelming 75% of the population just like housing's too expensive. How do we do this? How we need a wider range of types, and so this is what we're trying to do. So anyway, so thanks for having us here. I hope I didn't talk too long, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or be part of any discussion you want to have about how we move forward with this. And I can open up the chat here.
Well, thank you so much. We've got a bunch of folks whose hands have popped up who are ready to share. Councilmember Syrat was first on the draw. If you could stop sharing your screen for just a moment, that'll kind of expand out folks' capacity. Who I have in the queue is Councilmember Syrat, Delinia, Andrew Lunding, and then Cy. And Cy is joining us from our what we affectionately call Whiteaker Light or Whiteaker Heights, if you're Brad Foster in Jefferson West Side. So Councilmember Syrat, on to you, and then Delinia, you're on deck. Councilmember Syrat.
Hi, thank you. I'll have to make a joke at Cy's expense of Whiteaker wannabe, but sorry. So hi, Peter. Thanks so much for joining us. I don't think we've met. I've been a stalwart fan of Better Housing Together, and I just wanted to add to the conversation and take a little credit I was the city councilor who made sure those ADU code changes that Better Housing Together was advocating for were passed. There was resistance, and it was an effort, and the advocacy of Karin and the other Better Housing Together folks has just been so important in getting us to this conversation, to where we can have this conversation. So I've been a vocal advocate for the middle housing work, in spite of being called a zealot and some other unpleasant names by folks who are very much opposed to seeing changes in our housing code. And I will often reference Whiteaker, which is where I live, Peter, as an example of a very dense neighborhood with a wonderful character that accommodates a lot of people in a lot of different housing types. And we just do it so beautifully. But, you know, that's not necessarily what folks out in the suburbia curlicues are interested in. I wanted to draw to everyone's attention the fact that City Council had a work session today on our housing implementation pipeline. And so we are taking a new approach, and this connects with the visit from Sheryl from the Mission and this visit from Peter. So we're really looking at the continuum of our services for unsheltered folks through our work supporting and funding permanent supportive housing, as well as public subsidized affordable housing, all the way to how do we create conditions to encourage more market rate housing. So we started talking about that today, and I really want to raise a red flag. Different folks may have different views on this, but a couple of counselors today, Counselor Clark and Counselor Groves, started talking about the need to expand our urban growth boundary so that we can build more single family housing, because building in the way that Peter has just demonstrated is not appealing, is not how they view what we need. And so that is gonna, create more sprawl, eat up more of our farmland, do a lot of things that I personally don't want to see happen in Oregon. I'm one of those California transplants. I see how they've just eaten up every inch of open space with housing, and we can do it more smartly here. So I just want to raise the flag. There are strong prevailing forces that are going to continue to push to expand the urban growth boundary, to fight more dense development. And unfortunately, some of those NIMBYs that Peter referred to, really the bottom line is they don't want more people living near them. So this idea of using our land more efficiently is an anathema to them, because it means strangers are going to move in to their neighborhood. And for me, in a lot of ways, and I know this will offend some people, single family zoning was created to keep African Americans out of Berkeley's housing stock. That it was a deliberate attempt at racial segregation, and it worked. So I think we need to keep that in mind when we think about how we're tackling our code here in our community. So thanks for letting me go on about that.
I just want to respond. One thing is, I agree with everything you said, and I appreciate that, you've been a great voice for this on the council, right? And it's hard to have these discussions in Eugene, and we've really, this has been noted. And I think it's even a little worse than we think it is. What I've been telling my students for about 10 years is, I think we're going to have millions of climate change refugees coming to Oregon. And pretty soon, there's not going to be any food being grown in the Central Valley in California. And because of what seems to be the climate things, there probably will still be able to grow food in the Willamette Valley. And the amazing thing we're going to coast on is that we passed these land use laws in the 1970s here that preserved our farmland. We're going to need all of that farmland to grow food, to feed people. And so when I think about millions of people coming here, I say, where do they go? And I agree completely that we don't want to sprawl out and suck up resources and land doing that. We need to think about how do we redevelop our neighborhoods, which are incredibly low density. And there's so many good opportunities to densify them. And I don't even say, not make them worse. I think they will make them better. So, I have a plan as soon as I'm already working on a scheme for our property where I'm planning on putting 3 units in our backyard. And I know I'm figuring out how to do this. And I think it will make our lives better rather than just having this big backyard we have to take care of that's kind of useless. So I think, we're just seeing so many people in this country have their heads in the sand on so many issues. And so we may be talking about a little issue like housing capacity in Eugene, but it does tie into those tremendous issues like climate change. And so how do we, think globally and act locally, right? How do we respond at this very local level to do the things we need to do to accommodate the things that are coming at us like a freight train very soon? So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Councilmember Syret, and thank you so much, Peter, for this rich conversation. And this rich conversation is continuing on in the chat. And so if you'd like, please engage in the chat too. That's another way to contribute. We have Delinia. I thought I saw your hand go up for a moment, so I wanted to make sure that I'm not seeing things. And I wanted to pass it on to you next before we move it on to Andrew. And I apologize, Andrew, but I forgot your last name, not Andrew Martin, the other Andrew. So Delinia, you're first, and Andrew, whose last name I forget, you are on deck. Delinia?
So one concern that I know our neighborhood has, because we do have a dense population, is parking. That looks beautiful, but how do you guys also, do you take that into account?
So on the regulations we wrote with the state, because what we know is what people like to do is write regulations and say, well, you're allowed to do this, but then you put in a bunch of other requirements that actually make it impossible to do. So we wrote the model code that says a city can't require more than 1 parking space per unit. Okay, in terms of the city code, you can build as many parking spaces as you want on your property, but you can't require more. And there's a funny thing that goes on with parking. That parking seems really, really important until you get to a certain density. And then you don't actually, there's many other options. There's a density where you can walk to things. There's a density that supports transit. And that number, the real inflection point in the curve seems to be about 25 units per acre. And so Whiteaker, you're right, has this incredible range of housing types. And I only find the parking problem with Whiteaker is if we try to drive over to Whiteaker to go have dinner or something, right? You have to drive a few blocks. But I'm a New Yorker, right? I never owned a car until I was 34 and moved to Oregon. We can have places that really function with transit, with bikes, with walking, and you need to get to a certain level of density for that to happen. So I guess we see parking as being this kind of somewhat of an interim problem. It will solve itself. And the cost of parking is tremendous, right? When you look at how much space parking spaces take up, it's huge. And we just sort of we bury, it's an externality in our culture. We bury the cost of parking in the sort of general housing costs. And if you don't require people to have parking, we say, well, let people decide whether they want to have parking or not. And, I've got a 19-year-old daughter. We spent a year traveling around the country, driving in a little tiny trailer. And everywhere we went, I said, where do you want to live? After you've seen most of the country, she says, I don't know. But all I know is I want to live in a place where I don't have to drive to conduct my day-to-day life. I'm like, that's a good basic criterion right there. So I think parking gets a little messy in the interim, but I think in the long run, it kind of resolves itself when we go towards a society or in a way of building where things are dense enough that you don't need to drive everywhere.
That might just be something that you want to add to, as far as explain that explanation actually helps and maybe change some of the NIMBYs a little bit. I don't know.
The whole problem is they have to take my whole course on this, and it takes 10 weeks to go through that. And it's a lot of stuff.
Thanks for this super dynamic conversation. And I just want to let folks know that we're a touch behind. So we're going to cap it off after Andrew Martin. Andrew Lunding, apologies for forgetting your last name. Thanks for being patient, and feel free, you're next, and Cy, you're on deck.
Thank you. first of all, sorry to blast everyone with my contact info. I've never used Zoom on the phone. It wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be while walking the dog when I started this meeting. Peter, thank you for all you do. I had one question because I think there's one missing piece to this awesome idea of sort of middle housing, which is how are people going to afford to put a house in their backyard when they own a home? Or if someone owns multiple homes, how would they afford to put these structures in? Because like you said, you know, the basic timber and the basic things that you need to put up a house cost money. And so is there any resources people could use to maybe help fund those if you promise to rent them out and that sort of thing, just to alleviate that?
Thanks. That's a great
sort of missing
question.
piece?
Yeah, no, it is. And then I think, you know, if you know Richie Weinman, who used to be like the housing person in the city government, he built an ADU on a piece of property he already owned a few years ago. He goes, the total development cost per square foot of this ADU is about $230, right, per square foot. It's expensive to do small scale infill development. And he says people don't build ADUs because they're get rich off them. They build them because they have a need for them. They need their parents to move into it or something like that, or a child returning to the city. And so you're absolutely right. So the affordability is an issue. So we're talking about House Bill 2001 and what it requires, this increase in density, but there's a number of proposals we're talking about that we'd like to see. So and LA is actually doing some of this amazingly, because they're thinking about ADUs and such as starting to try to solve the housing crisis in LA. If you agree to build a unit and say rent it out or sell it be below a certain price level, do you get a tax subsidy? Do you get your taxes rebated for keeping it affordable? Do you have your SDCs, your system development charges, rebated for keeping it affordable? So there's a number, and so they're talking about greater affordability is becoming the strategy. And again, it's not one silver bullet. It's a number of strategies that if you can sort of get three of them, you know, standing on top of each other, that starts to make it affordable. All of this, you know, my students have done this beautiful work in the past 5 years. And I make all my students do economic pro formas. We run numbers on all of the projects to see what would make it affordable. So I didn't show, one of my students said, what would it take to sort of get minimum wage people, maybe transitional housing, homeless people, what can they afford? And she came up with, they can afford 164 square feet. Somebody who's making $20,000 a year can afford to without any subsidy, buy 164 square feet of housing. And she designed like a transitional homeless housing project fitting on one lot in the Friendly neighborhood. And everyone had their own little tiny micro apartment. And then they had a shared common spaces that were kitchens and eating area and showers and such. And she managed to design this, and we got it down to where people could afford housing without subsidy who were making $20,000-$25,000 a year. So I think we need to really, so there's what the House Bill 2001 will allow us to do, and the economics will be hard. And that's why the NIMBYs who are worried that developers from Portland are going to roll into Jefferson West Side and knock down every house and build an ugly fourplex, it ain't going to happen, right? It's going to be gradual. It's hard to do this. We're going to have to start having some test cases. And then start learning from those and see what we're actually able to do. And I think, so people are already thinking about the economic implications of how do we try to encourage this or look at those stress points in producing housing that allows people to kind of do this. And I think it's going to be a learning curve, as we start to do this, but great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andrew. And Cy and Andrew Martin, you're on deck. And if you could, please keep your questions brief. Sorry to keep you waiting so long, but I want to make sure that we have plenty of time allocated for SURJ and their presentation on police policy reform. And Cy, go right on ahead.
Okay, quick thing to follow up with what Andrew L said. I'm not sure if there's organizations like NEDCO that would be willing to partner with folks, just as an idea. I'm not sure if that's reality. Also, did you say 4 units would be allowed per piece of property? Crazy. Okay.
Yeah.
And then my real sort of actual question was that I'm worried that this whole conversation, which is very important, is going to start pitting green spaces against housing, and we need both of them. And this sort of also ties into what Councilwoman Syrett talked about with expanding the urban growth boundary. I think that all of that is a mistake. We clearly need green spaces, and we actually are at a deficit of trees currently. So I'm not sure where you are with that, and the possible fight
yeah.
between those two.
I've been an advocate of, more public green spaces and higher density. We have this funny thing in this country where we have a big open space and we decide that the appropriate housing type to put up against it is single family detached houses on quarter-acre lots. I'm like, no, I think you put the big dense housing up against the big open spaces and such. And so I think that, and what I'm most interested personally in this is, I'm a New Yorker and I adapted to becoming Eugenian. And I don't think most Eugenian want to live in 5-story apartment buildings. I don't think that's a preference. I think Eugenians want to have something they feel that's their own place. They want direct access to an outdoor space. And we have a yard where we've got this big backyard, like, man, it's just a pain in the ass to take care of it, right? Just chopping down those blackberries and everything. And we'd like to develop it so we have less yard to take care of. And we'd like to design really good either private outdoor spaces or actually shared outdoor spaces, working around the existing trees and all of that. So I think often part of it is simply, and here's the hard thing with writing code, it's very hard to write good design into code, right? It's very hard to say, this is what you do and this will produce a good building versus don't do those things. I think we can. There's something called form-based codes now. And form-based codes have this radical idea of, rather than come up with a bunch of abstract principles and applying them and then 20 years later going, that's not what we expected to happen. That's kind of awful. Form-based code said, why don't you try to design what you like and then figure out how to write regulations or rules that encourage that and stop the stuff you don't like. So my gut feeling is, I'm just retired. And my wife and I, our daughter's gone to college. We live in this big house, up in the hills by ourselves. This is a crazy house for 2 old people to live in. This house should be split up into 3 separate units, for God's sakes. And I know tons of people like this in Eugene. What they want to do is downsize, move out of their houses, move into a small unit closer into the center in a walkable neighborhood. But they want a nice little unit and a nice outdoor space. And those units don't exist. And they haven't been allowed to exist by code until next year. So I think what will happen is, I think there'll be a densification of certain areas with those kinds of units and still the respect for usable open spaces. And what I'll be doing in the next few months is putting more and more of my students' work up online. So my students' work who I showed, she did the most amazing studies of how, and she actually started looking at, well, suppose we start greening the streets, suppose we start using front yards and street right-of-ways. And she showed how a neighborhood might evolve over 30 or 50 years as it densifies. And they're kind of amazing visions. And so she's kind of starting to, and I'm so pleased she stayed in Eugene. Usually our really good students move up to Portland and Seattle. She decided to stay here so we can grab all of her ideas over the next few years. And so I think it's going to take a lot. It's not going to be easy. This is something we haven't done in a long time. And I think we'll just get good at this. There'll be people doing my former student Dylan's project in Springfield. It's a beautiful project, 6 units on 1 single lot, and it's really wonderful and affordable. And so I think as we start getting more and more models, we'll see how to have that open space and building balance. And which I think is my gut feeling is, New Yorkers, hey, let's build a tower. I'm going to live at the top of the tower. That's great. I don't think that's a solution for Eugene. And I think this is actually a way we can have both of those things.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. Really appreciate your time tonight and your presentation. And from Councilmember Syret, she mentioned the C Street project in Springfield is a great example of what's possible. Yes. And actually, we had those folks at our last general meeting when we're talking about what the diversity of housing could look like in different cities close by. So really just so grateful that you were here today and that it builds upon our conversation that we had with Square One Villages last month, particularly knowing that we have a housing crisis that certainly impacts all of our community members. But as we look to find ways to work together with our social service providers like Sheryl at the Eugene Mission, we know that we're only one part of that continuum. And Peter, to your point earlier that, gosh, we're a lot different than other neighborhood associations. that's because of the people who live here primarily, right? We have a different set of values in the way that we live, and we co-create community. So we'd just welcome you back. And then also, if you could give us any follow-up information about how we could, as a board, talk about potentially becoming part of the coalition. Like I sent you via email our long history of creating supportive housing through the Blair Street co-ops and getting some of the nation's first community development block grant funding from the Ford administration, and the work that we're doing now. We actually have a partnership with Oregon Health Authority. This hasn't been announced, so it's fresh off the press, to do work with Oregon Health Authority to make sure that both landlords and tenants have access to Oregon's emergency rental assistance program, to make sure that our entrepreneurs, our good landlords, some of which are on the call tonight, have access to emergency funding through the state and through the feds, and that tenants who have experienced really tough economic hardships during COVID have access to the rental assistance they need, so they don't have to move out of the Whiteaker. So I just want to say thanks for joining us tonight. We are different because we're the Whiteaker, and so we would love to have more information about what it would mean to be a part of the coalition, so we can engage with that at a future board meeting. So you're more than welcome to stay if you'd like.
I'd like to.
But
This is
yeah,
great.
fantastic. Well, then we're going to pass it off next to our community members who are joining us from SURJ, Showing Up for Racial Justice. They're a national organization which has chapters all across the 50 states, and if I'm not mistaken, beyond international chapters as well. Ellen R. from the River Road Social Justice Committee is here. And Ellen, you're joined by Pat Bryan, a community member who came to one of our last general meetings saying that they wanted to be able to engage with us in our Social Justice Committee. Our secretary of the organization, Angie Byers, connected y'all to us. And so tonight, I know that one of the items for consideration by the board is potential endorsement of a letter advocating for police policy reforms that were advocated to the city council by our ad hoc committee on police policy. And again, please remember, Ellen and Pat, accidentally misconstruing information is a pastime of mine. So feel free to course correct me, because I'm sure I colored outside the lines just a touch. Ellen, Pat, thanks so much for joining us tonight, and I will pass it on to y'all.
Okay, thank you very much. I am trying to share my screen to bring up the PowerPoint. Having a little trouble doing that for some reason. Lovely.
I don't know if it will help, but I can pick up my cat and make her dance in front of the screen.
I did send it to Angie. Angie, I don't know if you have any way of screen sharing the PowerPoint I sent you.
I just changed the screen sharing options so that multiple participants can share simultaneously. You might just want to click the green share screen button.
Right, I'm doing that, and I'm seeing the open file, and I'm clicking on it, but nothing's happening.
So Angie, if you want to email it to me, I might be able to present it in the meantime. And then while we're pulling this up, Pat and Ellen, if you...
Oh, wait a minute, I think I figured it out.
Great, yep, we can see it now.
I think I figured it out, yay, okay, great. Well, just having a little technical issue here. Ellen, do you want to begin while I'm getting this slideshow set up to view? And we'll go from there.
And Ellen, I've just asked you to unmute, so you should be able to unmute yourself as you go, and we should be able to hear you just fine.
Okay. So in the summer of 2020, as a member of SURJ, I became aware of the City Council's invitation to form the ad hoc committee on police policy. And along with Pat and other people, we began tracking and following the work of the committee, their sessions. And I became inspired by the level and intensity of the hard work they were doing, and especially the hard work in the face of the complexity of the issues they were facing. And so with my feeling of being inspired, I went to my fellow members of the River Road Social Justice Committee. And we started talking about it and decided to we developed a letter of support for the work of the ad hoc committee. And we presented the letter to our parent organization, the River Road Community Organization, and they discussed the topic, and the River Road Board endorsed the letter. And so from there, our Social Justice Committee went on to want to reach out to other neighborhood associations. So Pat, you could put the next slide on now. Oh, I guess we're not doing the slideshow.
I'm trying to get there.
Okay.
Let me try one more time to see if I can get this where it needs to be. I have a little bit of a tremor, which sometimes makes it hard for me to operate under pressure like this.
Okay.
Aha.
So that's Pat. You know what? I think that what you wrote
Everybody see
that
that?
we went over.
Can everybody see that?
We can, and I just got your PowerPoint slide, so I'm more than happy.
Thank you. I think we're good.
With the group. Okay.
Well, let's go to the PowerPoint.
So I'm screen sharing and we're on slide 2, Ellen.
That's not what I'm seeing, Pat.
Okay.
I'm
So-
seeing the text of the letter.
Okay, and what is everybody else seeing?
We're seeing the text of the letter too. So I'm working with Angie right now to get
Okay.
the slides. I
Okay.
haven't got them in my.
Let's just ad lib it, Pat, and I'll say that we're here. So after the River Road Social Justice Committee developed the letter, we began bringing it to other neighborhood associations, and we're bringing it to you tonight. And Pat, I think if you read what was on the script, it'll be great, and people will get the gist.
That's great. Okay. Well, I'm going to actually start from slide number 3. Just to first of all thank Ellen for her work on this. We are both SURJ members, but we're coming to you tonight as community members. Ellen from the River Road Council, and I'm a Whiteaker resident. So Eugene City Council and Mayor formed the ad hoc committee on police policy in response to local and worldwide uprising protesting the systemic racism evident in George Floyd's murder in May 2020, as well as police killings of many Black people of all genders and members of other marginalized groups before and since. Locally, among others, the 2015 death of Brian Babb, a white military veteran undergoing a mental health crisis who was fatally shot from an armored police vehicle, and the 2019 death of Eliborio Rodriguez, an unarmed Latinx man who resisted being arrested for walking in the street in a white neighborhood and for wearing a hoodie on a cold night. The ad hoc committee reviewed more than 200 police reform policies outlined in the Campaign Zero platform and President Obama's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. The committee's final report, available online, was delivered to the City Council in May 2021. Next slide, please. Mayor Venus invited 10 organizations to each send 2 representatives to the ad hoc committee, including, as you can see, members from Centro Latino Americano, the Human Rights Commission, Transponder, NAACP, League of United Latin American Citizens, Black Unity, the Eugene Islamic Center, and others. In addition, the mayor appointed 4 at-large members who you can see at the end of the chart. It's important to state at the outset that a large number of ad hoc community members came to see the parameters and structure dictated by City Council as deeply flawed. Some members withdrew altogether, and others submitted statements for the final report criticizing the process itself, as well as the limited timeline that they were given to explore a deeply entrenched policing system, which arose from controlling enslaved people and which has always been based in a white supremacist culture. In addition, the city instructed the committee that consideration of the police budget was a separate process and not something they were permitted to address. Next slide, please. So what did the ad hoc committee do? For 7 months, despite reservations, they worked tirelessly. They had briefings and studied past and current structures, policies, and practices of the Eugene Police Department. They heard hours of often painful testimony from community members, and they discussed and debated 85 motions in 5 working groups, yielding 50 recommendations that were eventually approved by the full committee. Watching the committee proceedings shed light on how difficult it is for marginalized voices to be heard over the noise of bureaucracy. The City Council's instructions depended a great deal on a problem-solution approach, which often tended to flatten voices and to mute deep critiques of the system. As I said, the 220-page report was submitted to City Council in May 2021. The council's in the process now of considering the recommendations. And despite its shortcomings and flaws, ad hoc committee members have expressed hope that the Eugene community will honor their considerable labor by pressing the City Council to make every effort to follow through on them. Next slide. These are the 5 policy areas the recommendations addressed, and Ellen's going to give us just a brief explanation of these.
I'm just going to highlight a few of the recommendations made in each category. For example, in hiring and training, the committee recommends that the EPD work with the community so that patterns of systemic exclusion are not replicated, and addressing bias with evidence-based testing. With respect to body cameras, the recommendations prohibit muting and editing. They advance civilian access to footage and reaffirm the public's right to film police. More importantly, under use of force, the committee recommended vastly greater use of unarmed skilled teams like cahoots with a separate dispatch number to address all non-criminal calls, called for de-escalation and demilitarization to shape the culture of the EPD, and also an overhaul of policy regarding demonstrations and crowd control. Of course, even if policy changes are made around de-escalation, for example, the duty to intercede with fellow officers, or the requirement that police have to justify any departure from using de-escalation as a first resort, these changes won't have real teeth unless the structure of civilian oversight is overhauled, along with strengthening civilian investigative powers. Right now, we have several intersecting civilian bodies, but they don't have ultimate authority over police discipline and accountability. For example, the Civilian Review Board can investigate a case to some degree and recommend consequences, but the EPD is under no obligation to even inform the Civilian Review Board of what they do. The ad hoc committee members didn't come to consensus about the best structures to accomplish this, but there was strong agreement that police need to be governed by community values, not police values, and a strong call to us as the community to follow this process through. So I'll turn it back to Pat now who will lead us in talking about our responsibility to do that, to follow through, support the committee's work.
Next slide, please. So as a first step, we're inviting Whiteaker Community Council to join other groups in signing this letter to the Eugene City Council and Police Department. The River Road Community Organization, Active Bethel Community, Friendly Street Neighbors, or Friendly Area Neighbors, and Jefferson Westside Neighbors have joined the River Road Social Justice Committee in signing. Santa Clara Neighbors has written its own statement, and I believe Southeast Neighborhood Group is also working on their own statement. Your board has a copy of the full statement, but here we'll look at just a few highlights. You can see them highlighted on this page, and the next page will show what we're highlighting. And it's going to take a minute to load. This is not my PowerPoint, and I didn't want to mess with this system, so we'll just let it load and then look at the highlights. Would you go back to that previous slide? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so some of the highlights in this statement are to the City Council to advocate for adequate CAHOOTS funding, first of all. Second, to urge EPD to make de-escalation skills normative. Then to restructure existing institutions of oversight to make policing accountable. To implement procedural justice policies. And what this means is that procedural justice in encounters with police means that people's stories are heard and respected, police decisions are transparent, and that the police are accountable in the end to the communities that they serve. And finally, the letter urges City Council and Eugene Police Department to continue engaging with Eugene communities of color and other marginalized groups so that the changes made reflect an ongoing inclusive reality of public safety. Next slide. So we're inviting you to sign this letter asking City Council and EPD to do the immediate and the long-term work of implementing the ad hoc committee's recommendations. Next slide. In addition, we're asking each of you as citizens and community members to stay engaged over the long haul in this process towards making changes, and to pick one or more of these ways to do so. Follow the City Council's work on policing, follow the collective bargaining process between the city and the police union, lobby for civilian oversight of police practices, advocate for ongoing engagement with communities of color and other marginalized groups whose perspectives are needed for meaningful long-term change. And finally, just to talk with others about the values you want public safety practices to reflect in Eugene. Next slide. Or not. There it is. Thanks. And we welcome your questions.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation, Ellen and Pat. Certainly really appreciate you reinforcing the work that's been done by community members, particularly those from historically marginalized communities and underrepresented communities, so that they have a voice through this. I wanted to do a quick time check. We're a few minutes behind, and I just, Councilmember Syret had to leave us. I know some other board members have time constraints too. So Angie, your hand is up right now, and it's 8:57. Angie, you're first in the queue.
Yes, I know we as a group talk a lot about encouraging our neighbors to use the police or to call certain numbers, but we understand as a group that many of our neighbors do not want to involve the police in a lot of matters. I feel like this is a step towards an opportunity to make the police, sorry, there's a cat fight in my house currently, to allow our neighbors to feel like the police are held accountable when they make poor decisions in their job. And it allows the Whiteaker Community Council to let our neighbors know we are hearing you. We understand that you appreciate programs like community support officers. We know you appreciate programs like Cahoots. Yeah, I think this is a great representation of a lot of feedback we're hearing, even as we encourage people to call police and they're adamantly saying, no, thank you. So this is a step forward to get, the police involved in police matters and possibly just really enrich some of those other avenues for community safety.
Thank you so much, Angie. And Jen, you're going to be the last person commenting on this because it's 8:59 and I want to make sure that we can end as promptly as possible. Jen, please go on ahead.
So, okay, I like what I'm hearing, and thank you, ladies, for doing the work that you're doing. The thing that crosses my mind is that we are having a very difficult time finding those who want to be police officers. And also, as I understand, we're having great difficulty finding people to do the work that Cahoots would do. And so, how do we do this? Of course, we have to go forward with this, but how do we deal with when we don't have enough officers or help to address this? Because it seems all this good work, it hopefully gets addressed, isn't going to be dealt with unless there are those officers available, or the Cahoots and all the things, services that they offer. And they deserve to have their own computer in their car and their own phone number. That's just the first thing that crossed my mind.
Yeah, I'd like to take the opportunity to respond really briefly. I wish we had more time because there's lots and lots to unpack and discuss about this, but I appreciate what you're saying. Just what I would say in response is Cahoots is quite underfunded. They do not have the resources to attract, train, and retain the people to do the service. And over 80% of calls are situations that do not involve lethal force of any kind, that do not require an armed response. The staff at Cahoots are much more economical than paying police to respond to those kinds of calls: domestic disputes, drug alcohol issues, trespassing, homeless related issues. So, we need to think as a community about where our limited funds should go and how we should be allocating funds to response from non-armed people versus armed police. Ellen, did you want to add anything in it, just very briefly to that?
No, I think you covered the important points. And as far as the question of how do we address it, we can support this letter and also take it upon ourselves to urge the council to fund Cahoots at a much higher level that is needed. And that will also reduce pressure on the police officers.
Right.
So I just want to follow up with, does it feel like the police department, the EPD, wants this change?
Well, I think a number of us, I've certainly talked with Chief Skinner on a number of occasions. He certainly values the work of SURJ. He values the work of SURJ, I hope, values the work of Cahoots, and vice versa. Talked to Amanda, who's the director of Cahoots, Amanda Morgan, and I know they have a very close working relationship. But it's a matter of, just funding adequately for non-emergency or non-violent types of situations. So it's a matter of funding, and everybody's scrambling for funding. So that's always an issue. But that's where the community comes to bear of like, what are our community values around public safety? Wanting to prevent harm to our community and our most vulnerable community members, especially, including those with mental health issues. And so how can we do that? How can we provide public safety for all of our community members?
Thank you so much, Jen and Angie, for your comments. And thanks again, Pat and Ellen. I'd like to invite you to our board meeting next week. I wish we had more time for a robust conversation. There's members of the community that really hope that we can endorse this letter, and there's board members who want to be able to have a deeper conversation in order for us to be able to make a motion, have a deliberation, and then a vote if there's a second. So I'd welcome you back to our board meeting next week, and we can certainly make time on the agenda for this really important letter and to be able to have a deeper conversation because community members would like that. Angie, go right on ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask if one or both of you would mind coming back, just because I am seeing in the comments they want more discussion. I might have more questions. And can we, if they decide to come back, can we put them first on the agenda so they don't have to hang till the end?
Yep.
Like tonight.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, we can put them right first on the agenda after public comment for our meeting Wednesday, the 20th from 7 to 9 p.m.
Great. I can plan to be there.
You
for
can,
sure.
Pat. Thank you very much. I appreciate your flexibility with that.
Yeah, you bet. No, be glad to do that.
Ellen, feel free to jump right on it.
I would just like to make it clear, since SURJ has been mentioned several times in this discussion, that we are not representing SURJ here, that SURJ decided to take a pause from advocating for the letter because they're considering putting abolitionist values at the forefront of their work. And the River Road Social Justice Committee is very enthusiastic about wanting to support the work of the ad hoc committee that it was able to accomplish within its limits.
Margaret, you're going to have the last word. I know that we have I want to make a motion tonight about our alternative clinic location on the 29th.
Okay.
So go right ahead.
Just real quick. So I have all the information, so I'm educated a little bit when you come back next week. So I actually went to the city's website and there's a whole page on ad hoc, and there's a 2-page summary, and there's a lot of information there. You're proposing that we agree with all of that. That's my question.
Yes, we're proposing that we express as a community our support for the work of the ad hoc committee, which took upon itself this very complex, admittedly many faceted question. And the ad hoc committee itself did not have unanimity on some of the questions.
Right.
So-
And that's, I mean, that the letter that we got when we got sent an email with some attachments, I could read the first letter, but the rest of it, it wouldn't open the PDF or something. And so then I went to the city's website and found it. And there's a lot more information on there, but it's
right,
very
Margaret.
different than what your initial, it goes into much more depth.
Sure. I mean, the
So
final.
I just want to know, is that's what you're representing, is like that 2-page summary that's on there?
I'm actually not sure what the 2-page summary is that you're referring to, but there's a 220-page report that from the ad hoc committee that has a number of appendices from the some of the organizations that were had members on the committee, and also from individuals who were on the committee. So yes, we're not asking you, or we're not planning to pick and choose and decide amongst ourselves which recommendations to support. We're asking the committee and the police department to fully and deeply consider all of the recommendations made, forwarded. There are 50 of them forwarded in the report to fully investigate and support as many as possible, advocate
Okay.
at the state level for things that need to happen at the state level. Great question, Margaret, and we'll talk more in depth next week.
And thank you. I didn't read the 200-page summary,
I don't
but I
blame
did
you.
read the 2-page summary, which pretty much I think sums it up. And there's some great stuff in there.
I will go back and look at that before next week's meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And if anyone has questions for Pat or for Ellen, I don't want to volunteer them, but please pass them on to Angie, who's been our point of contact with them, and we can triage those questions before our meeting next week. And I wanted to just touch back something to what Peter said earlier. You know, sometimes when we're espousing for policy, the perfect can be the enemy of the good. I think that the ad hoc committee on police policy is an audacious set of recommendations, not all of which I agree with, but the process in which you had folks at the table who historically never had a voice and really had a spread of very broad and sweeping changes to police policy to be able to redress some of the historic marginalization and systemic racism that has really caused policing, particularly in an Oregon context, to be disproportionately wielded against communities of color for the past 100+ years. So there's a lot there to unpack, and there's some city council meetings too. But what I would say is that, you know, take a critical eye, look at the letter, see what it's asking us to be able to vote on, and then also read the 2-page summary of recommendations from the Ad Hoc Committee on Police Policy report, because that summary really focuses on the recommendations themselves from the process. The 200-page document gets into the process, right? But the 2-page summary document gets into the recommendations, right? What the process yielded. So I'm sure we can talk about this tomorrow, but I wanted to super quickly, make a motion to the board. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, and thanks y'all so much for hanging on, is that we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization that make votes by consensus. So any board member can make a motion for a vote. And tonight I'd like to make a motion that we allocate $500 of our grant funding from the Oregon Health Authority COVID-19 grant for community-based organizations to our October 29th clinic, so that we can partner with the Hybrid Lounge, which is now called Salon, on 3rd Street, which is an art gallery and community space, to host our vaccine clinic, where we will have free, it's a wellness clinic with free COVID-19 vaccines, as well as testing, menstrual supplies for people with periods, and other incentives for people to come and get vaccinated and have access to healthcare. So the motion is that we allocate $500 of our grant funding and move forward with a formal partnership, a contract with the Hybrid Lounge to be our wellness clinic partner on October the 29th.
I'll second that.
Thanks so much.
Jennifer can second.
Cool. So we had a motion from me and a second from Jennifer. And just for those folks at home, when someone makes a motion, it needs a second. It needs a second board member to say, yes, I think this is worth discussing. And so now we're in the discussion section. So now any board member can discuss the motion that's before the group. And so I wanted to open it up. Does any board members want to discuss this? Jen, go right on ahead. And then
Can Margaret and Delania, can you share what went on yesterday when you went to see the facility? Tell us what's there. How many bathrooms do they have? Give us a setup.
So it's getting kind of late, and we're at 9:15. I will tell you that I need to go. I'm tired. I have to get up and go to work in the morning. But what I would like to ask, Delania, if you want to go through and explain that, I don't know how that will work. But Janet, it'll be a great spot to see how it will work. The only thing I have a question about is the parking. But they're super nice people. They're great. They're going out of their way to set it up so that we can have whatever we need.
So I guess we'll talk about this next week.
They offered to pay you know, for us to do it for free, but I pretty much said no because we do have funding and they are small. They're opening a gallery. It's a great space. I've gone to events there before. Parking is no more an issue there than it is down the street where the other clinics were at. They've got a great space. They're willing to work with us. They have an outdoor space and an indoor space. They work with the neighbors. So they let them know, like, hey, there's stuff happening here. So yeah, it's a pretty great space. They have heaters if we need just outside space. They have tents with the privacy stuff. So, and for $500, it's a steal.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, we're not using the indoor space. They're actually setting up tents for us outside. And they're going to do all of that for us. Put in heaters, do the whole bit.
Wow.
But
Wow.
their inside space is an art gallery.
Yeah.
So I would like to know, Ian, real quick, this is just for the 29th, right?
That's correct. And then Doriandra, our program coordinator, is going to be researching different potential clinic locations and reaching out and establishing contact with some of the folks that we already have established contact with to be able to give the board a set of potential clinic locations for consideration for a more sustainable, longer lived set of partnerships from November onward. So really appreciate the questions and comments. And just for y'all who've never been to one of our wellness clinics, the last Friday of every month marks the Whiteaker Art Walk. So you couldn't pick a more perfect location to have a clinic for right where there's an art gallery and folks are going to be coming to be able to look at the art.
On the art walk too.
Yep. So if there's no more discussion, I wanted to call to question, which is basically to ask, hey folks, it's time for a vote. So I wanted to be able to ask board members to either abstain, vote in the affirmative, or vote for a nay. So all those in favor, please raise your hand or say
Ian,
aye.
I had a question about the $500.
Sorry, yep, Thea, I apologize. Go right on.
I just want a clarification on the $500. That's for a one-time rental of this, correct?
That is correct, yep.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so all those in favor, please raise your hand or say aye.
You want to go outside?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Angie, did you get the vote? Yes. Okay. And so just to let everyone know, we have a quorum tonight. So that means that we have enough members to have a vote. All those abstaining, please raise your hand or say aye. And then all those opposed, please raise your hand and say aye. Okay, it looks like the motion passes. And as I said earlier, saw in the chat from Jane, why are you leaving Alluvium? We want to be able to continue to provide the most comfortable and cleanest clinic space, and we feel that the hybrid lounge is the best place for us to be able to do that on October the 29th. And we want to be able to look for other options that provide ample parking, that are clean, that make people feel comfortable, that allow us to have greater co-location of services. So really looking forward to being able to partner with the hybrid lounge on the 29th and see other opportunities moving forward. Just wanted to say really quick, thank you so much. It's 9:17, way past people's bedtimes. I'll heat up warm glasses of milk and drop them at everyone's house tonight. Thank you everyone for making it today. Thanks for everyone's input. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you to the rest of our speakers, some of which had to leave. Really appreciate your input. And this will be posted on YouTube and the Whiteaker Open Neighbors page later on, so that community members who were not here are going to be able to see and hear and contribute moving forward. So hope to see y'all next week for our board meeting, which is again open to the public, where we will be considering first the police policy endorsement letter, where we'll also be hearing from Jennifer Hoover, the board member who's running point on our charter revisions, as well as discussing our ongoing work with public health. Thanks so much, everyone, and I hope you have a great night.